Hollywood woke up to a bombshell this week. Jimmy Kimmel Live has been yanked off the air. Yes, you heard that right. One of late-night TV's longest-running shows, suddenly suspended by ABC after Jimmy Kimmel's fiery monologue.
And they thought he was dead because it was so horrific, you know. And I said, dead?
And then we installed the most beautiful chandelier.
About the killing of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. The decision stunned not just fans, but the entire entertainment industry. For years, Kimmel has pushed the envelope with his political jokes, but nobody expected this kind of network shutdown. And now, the fallout has spilled out of the studio and onto the streets of Los Angeles. Hundreds of voices are gathering outside the Capitan Theatre, demanding answers, waving signs, and asking the big question, is this really about offensive remarks? Or is free speech in Hollywood under fire? By the very next day, Hollywood Boulevard didn't look like its usual tourist hotspot. Instead, more than 100 protesters packed the sidewalk outside the El Capitan Entertainment Center, the very place where Jimmy Kimmel Live is filmed. They came with handmade signs that said things like, "Don't bend the knee to Trump," and "Douse the mouse," a direct jab at Disney, the parent company of ABC. The scene got so intense that 2 lanes of traffic were blocked, while tourists and passers-by stopped to snap photos and figure out what all the commotion was about. This wasn't just another Hollywood protest. For many out there, it was about something bigger than Jimmy Kimmel himself. To them, the suspension represented a dangerous slide into censorship, a moment where political pressure might be drowning out free speech on one of the country's biggest platforms. So what exactly did Jimmy Kimmel say that set this whole chain of events into motion? It started with his Monday night monologue. Kimmel took aim at Tyler Robinson, the Utah man accused of fatally shooting conservative activist Charlie Kirk. He claimed the so-called MAGA gang was scrambling to paint Robinson as anything but one of their own, accusing them of twisting the story to score political points.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them.
But he didn't stop there. In classic Kimmel fashion, he turned his attention to President Trump, mocking him for giving reporters an update about a brand new White House ballroom, right after being asked how he was handling the death of his close ally, Kirk.
They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House.
Yes, okay. He's at the 4th stage of grief, construction.
The joke drew laughs inside the studio, but outside, the pushback began almost immediately. Critics argued Kimmel crossed a line, while supporters insisted he was doing what late-night hosts have always done, mixing comedy with hard truths. But just as the outrage over Kimmel's remarks was heating up, law enforcement dropped a twist that complicated everything. On Tuesday, investigators revealed that Tyler Robinson, the man accused of shooting Charlie Kirk, wasn't a right-wing extremist at all. In fact, they say he leaned liberal. Texts uncovered between Robinson and his partner showed him venting that he had had enough of Kirk's hatred, and that some hate can't be negotiated. That revelation threw Kimmel's comments under a harsher spotlight. Did he jump too quickly in linking Robinson's actions to the MAGA gang, or was the bigger story about how both sides are trying to spin a tragedy for political gain? The answers weren't clear, but the controversy was only growing louder. And then came the corporate hammer. By Wednesday, Nexstar Media Group, which owns dozens of ABC affiliates across the country, announced it was pulling Jimmy Kimmel Live from its stations altogether. Within hours, ABC followed suit, suspending the show indefinitely. That decision lit a fire under activists. The group Refuse Fascism quickly organized a protest right outside the theater where Kimmel usually films, framing his suspension as a direct attack on free expression. For the crowd on Hollywood Boulevard, this wasn't just about a late-night comedian losing his airtime. They saw it as a violation of the First Amendment, proof in their eyes that networks were caving to political pressure and silencing voices critical of those in power. As protests raged in Hollywood, the political machine in Washington was already weighing in. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, one of the most powerful regulators in broadcasting, took to a conservative podcast to slam Kimmel's remarks. Carr didn't just criticize. He went as far as warning that ABC's broadcast license could be at risk, saying networks have an obligation to operate in the public interest. That's a heavy statement when it comes from the head of the FCC, and it immediately raised eyebrows. Was this really about protecting the public, or was it a veiled threat to silence dissenting voices? Carr later told CNBC that we're in the middle of a massive shift in the media landscape. A shift, he said, that was fueled by Trump's election and the demand for more conservative perspectives. To critics, that sounded less like neutral regulation and more like politics dressed up as policy. Supporters, meanwhile, applauded it as overdue balance in a media world they believe has leaned liberal for far too long. And then, of course, President Trump himself couldn't resist jumping into the storm. While on a trip to the United Kingdom, reporters asked him directly about Kimmel's suspension. Trump's answer? It had nothing to do with censorship and everything to do with ratings. He called Jimmy Kimmel not a talented person, claimed the host had very bad ratings, and even added that ABC should have fired him a long time ago. To Trump, this wasn't about free speech or political pressure. It was simply a network cutting loose dead weight. That explanation stood in sharp contrast to what protesters on Hollywood Boulevard were saying. For them, this was about silencing a critic of the administration. For Trump, it was just business. The truth? Well, that depends on which side of the street you're standing on. Back on the streets of Hollywood, the crowd was far from unified in their exact reasoning, but united in their frustration. Andrea Silva argued that politicians were using Charlie Kirk's killing as a political weapon instead of mourning it as a human tragedy. Ken Tullo, a local dad, said he wasn't usually the protesting type, but felt compelled to speak out because he wants his daughters to grow up in a country where free speech isn't punished. Then there was Diane Hall, who had actually flown in with her husband for a live taping of Kimmel's show. She admitted she expected Jimmy's monologue to be far harsher, but when she heard it, she couldn't believe it was enough to get him suspended. Others, like Selassie Blackwell, admitted Kimmel's comments may have been in bad faith, but argued it didn't warrant canceling the entire show. And protester Mackenzie Lara put it bluntly, ABC was just too scared of Trump's wrath. Together, these voices painted a messy but powerful picture: disappointment, anger, and a deep fear that this was only the beginning of wider censorship. So here we are, protests flooding Hollywood Boulevard, networks scrambling under pressure, and President Trump openly celebrating Jimmy Kimmel's suspension. On one side, critics say the host crossed a line with his monologue. On the other, protesters argue this is a dangerous precedent, one where political power dictates who gets to speak and who doesn't. At the heart of it all lies a question that's bigger than late-night TV. Was this really about offensive remarks? Or was it about silencing dissent? What do you think? Was ABC right to pull the plug? Or was Jimmy Kimmel the latest victim of censorship in a polarized America? Let us know your thoughts down below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss more updates on the biggest stories shaking up Hollywood and beyond.